Once again, we say Shabbat Shalom to everyone. Welcome, family and friends, to our service this morning, and a special warm welcome to all of Brianna's family and friends, those who have joined us here, those who are joining us online. We all wish we were able to be together, but at the same time, we recognize how fortunate we are to be able to have the virtual platforms that enable us to share these beautiful moments, to capture them in our mind's eye, and to have a sense of a shared moment that will characterize our lives, enable us to hold on to these beautiful moments. And indeed, it is these beautiful moments that define us as individuals, define us as families, define us as communities, because we are a collection of our memories. And for a moment, I'd like to focus on that word memory with you this morning. Not particularly long, developed memories, but memories that are so fresh, so vibrant, and so powerful. And I'm speaking about this past Wednesday, when beginning about 11 o'clock and ending somewhere, I believe, around 9:30, we shared a moment as a people, as a community, as a country, and as a world, where both Lady Gaga and Yo-Yo Ma would be featured. Where from one end of this great country to the next, we were reminded of the positive, of the beautiful, the wonderful, and the blessing. It was a moment that was critically needed for all of us, I believe. Overcoming the challenges, attempting to overcome the challenges of the past few weeks, we were reminded the beauty that defined that moment on the Capitol Hill with the colors and the flags, the symbolic representations of 400,000 people who have passed away due to this pandemic. Indeed, there is so very much we share, and at the same time, so very much work to be done. As we reflected on that moment, the power of ritual stood before me, reminding me again and again the power of ritual, the actions that define various moments in our lives, to a great extent without words, or at least the words that are associated with that moment are embedded in our soul, but far often are not articulated in a way that you and I must relate with. It's in this week's Torah portion that we have the phrase, V'higadat halevincha, the core element associated with the Seder, the Pesach Seder, that gives rise to the entire evening associated with how we communicate values to the next generation. V'higadat halevincha, you shall tell your child, you shall teach your children who we are, why we are, and what is expected of them, so that they could carry on those values, as we just heard from the parents of our bat mitzvah, midor ledor, from one generation to the next. But if we sit around our Seder tables and don't put those ideas into our own vernacular, if we don't find a way to speak to the next generation, it ain't going to happen. It's not going to be passed down midor lador. We have to struggle with it, as the rabbis say to us, turn it over and over again until it does speak to us. Wednesday afternoon, Wednesday late morning, and throughout the day, and especially in the evening, was our 4-year ritual inauguration day. You stop and think about it, it's not so different from an anniversary day that a couple shares. The 10th anniversary, the 35th anniversary, the 2nd anniversary. What does that mean to us? What does a birthday say to us? What does Friday night say to us? We cannot afford to let these moments go without acknowledging how fortunate we are, the blessings that are ours. We put into words those things that we take for granted every single day. And this inauguration tried to remind us, in the midst of this painful reality that defines our country, how much for which we are to be thankful. The diversity, the creativity, the talent, the wonder, the capacity in the most difficult of times to, in fact, transfer power smoothly. Countries all over the world wish they had it as good as we. We found a way, and it wasn't easy, and it's still not easy. But we did find a way to move through that moment, and God willing, we will rise to the challenge over the course of the years as they unfold. This week's Torah portion, the Seder of Bo, shares with you and I those last moments of slavery of our people. It's hard to imagine 400 years of slavery. And then you are told you may leave. You don't know where the next meal is going to come from, where you're going to sleep tomorrow night, but you're allowed to go. And there were a lot of people that said, we're not sure we want to leave. We're not ready to accept that level of uncertainty into our lives. Ritual has the capacity to remind us that in the midst of uncertainty, there is a tremendous amount of dependability. And clearly, without any question, what enabled our predecessors to march out into the wilderness of Sinai and move forward with resolve was a sense that we can improve on this world. We have a mission to fulfill God's words, and we're going to leave the next generation in a better place than we are. And if you will, on this Shabbat morning immediately following the inauguration, I couldn't imagine standing before you without sharing at least a few words from that extraordinary poem that we all heard on Wednesday late morning, shared by Amanda Gorman, the first youth poet laureate of our country, who put into words so many of the feelings that we could identify, and at the same time, as powerful as were her words, was the way in which she delivered that poem. I hope I can do her justice as I share a portion of that speech. That poem delivered on the inauguration of President Biden. We've braved the belly of the beast, she begins. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace. And the norms and notions of what just isn't always justice. And yet the dawn is ours, and before we knew it, somehow we do it. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. We, the successors of a country and a time where a skinny black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting 2-1. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true. We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be. A country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free. We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation, because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens. We will rise from the gold-limbed hills of the West, from the wind-swept Northeast, where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked South. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover. And every known nook of our nation and every corner called our country, our people diverse and beautiful, will emerge battered and beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light. If only we're brave enough to see it. If only we're brave enough to be it. It is with that sense of courage and faith in ourselves, in God, and in the future that our people broke out of the bonds of slavery and delivered to humanity perhaps our greatest gift, the gift of hope, of promise, and the willingness, the desire, the passion to refuse to accept the status quo. We always imagine a better tomorrow. And indeed, as we read these verses that characterize this morning's Torah portion, we see in them that sense. We will never forget our enslaved past, because that is our anchor. That is our perennial reminder that we can and will and have an obligation to rise above
and we will never rest until the entire world is free and equal, has an equal opportunity to pursue the beauty and wonder that we know is the gift of being alive in this world. Together we say, Amen.